Tottenham Hotspur just ended a 17-year curse, and yet somehow that is only half of the story. A club that has been stained for the best part of 2 decades of never being able to get it over the line. Consistent bottlers. They literally have their very own verb. That is how much they are known as the nearly men in English football. And at the helm of that club is a manager that has been consistently and repetitively condescended, poked at, and discounted for not being good enough for English football. No doubt a true footballing man that's had to fight and claw for every opportunity, and yet when he arrived in North London at a club that felt like it mirrored his underdog status after 2 years of inconsistent performances and football that just didn't make sense at times, even the supporters of his club believed he didn't belong where he was. So today's video is going to be split into 2 parts. Firstly, what actually happened on that pitch in Bilbao that led to Tottenham Hotspur overcoming Man United in a European final. And alongside that, a story of both a manager and a club overcoming the odds, righting the wrongs of a reputation that was painted on them without their consent. And as they both reach the mountain that they had stared up at for so long, they're confronted with the question, can 2 underdogs really live with each other? Can they win with each other? Or will the chips on their shoulders get too big? And will Ange and Spurs' story start and end in Bilbao? So first we're going to look at the initial game plan, the tactical idea that both managers put onto the pitch to win the final. And the first problem I started to see were the distances in wide areas. Man United really like to build up in their wide channels, connecting that wing back coming deep and receiving off one of the centre-backs. And Spurs, in typical Ange fashion, were very brave and front-footed in how they wanted to press, using their initial front 3 to press those 3 centre-backs, but it was about the distances between both fullbacks which really intrigued me. Ange wanted his fullbacks to travel incredibly high up the pitch, travel a lot of meters to press this fullback to try and force that ball long into the channel, and combining with the 2 pivots here with Casemiro coming deep. This is typical of Amorim football, creating staggered lines in the midfield to try and build up progressively and quickly. He staggered Casemiro and Fernandes, with Fernandes almost creating this 3 behind the striker, but that allowed Tottenham, in connection with this high fullback, to be fairly close on Mount, who'd constantly play on the inside, and Fernandes, who's playing as more of a 10. So Spurs forced that ball going long into the channel where they could easily cover, and block that ball going centrally, most likely where Amorim wanted it to be. So it is 24 hours after the Europa League final, potentially one of the most hyped European finals we'll watch in a very long time. 2 English clubs walked out onto the pitch in Bilbao with so much jeopardy at stake, and only one left victorious. Like most football matches, Tom, the consequences and ripple effects of this game, I think, will be looked back upon for years to come as to the trajectory of both clubs. And we will one day speak about Man United and their season, and ultimately the utter failure from top to bottom at that football club. But today, the story needs to be about Tottenham. The story needs to be about Ange, and how both of them have just eclipsed the top of a mountain that, quite frankly, no one thought they would ever climb. When Ange Postecoglou arrived in North London just under 2 years ago now, all of the classic lazy reporting headlines started to be written. An Australian man that had ducked and dived his way through different footballing cultures and countries and had somehow found his way at the top table of English football. For many English football fans, their closest reference point was his work up in Scotland for Celtic, and if the tone hadn't already been set, a feeling of patronisation was starting to build for the Australian. People questioning, how does he play play football? Does he understand the rules? He knows it's not rugby, right?
Basically the Aussie, because he's just got crazy all-out tactics, which are so easy to soak up and counter.
And at least for me, and probably many, many actual Spurs fans, there was a real feeling of intrigue towards the Australian. A slight whispering and murmuring of Pep Guardiolan football mixed with a Klopp-like personality in the way that he speaks and translates his message. And the first 10 games for Spurs literally couldn't have gone any better. But this is exactly what the English media like to do. It will build you up in the good moments, and then when things start to turn sour, tear you right down to the very bottom and expose their ugly wounds and feelings that probably were there all along. Ange Postecoglou, since those first 10 games, has been swimming upstream in a river he didn't even choose to be in. People made up their minds before he even stepped onto the touchline in North London, and since then everything has just been waiting and finding evidence to justify their previous biases. Let me give you an example. I'll take you back to that home game versus Man City. We all know the one where if Spurs won, they'd get Champions League football for the next season, but if City won, it would help them in the race for the Premier League title and would lead Arsenal, their North London rivals, to miss out on winning the league. And for me, this was a pinch point in the relationship between the manager, the fans, and the media.
A proportion of your fans won't want you to win this game. How do you feel about that and the potential atmosphere it might create?
Know what real success looks like. Real success looks like trophies. Anything else in between, bragging rights, whatever it is absolutely meaningless. We've got a game tomorrow, we want to win.
The media were looking to put pressure on Ange to deliver a message to the fans that felt like an impossible one. A professional coach was never and will never going to come out in a press conference and declare that he's going to put out a team that's going to purposefully lose a football match so that their rivals will miss out on a title. And the media knew that, piling on the pressure on Ange to deliver a impossible message to the fans and supporters at home. And this was one of the first moments we saw Postecoglou's attempt at changing the mentality of Tottenham Hotspur, and it rubbed many fans the wrong way.
The last 48 hours has revealed to me the foundations are fairly fragile, mate, so I understand I'll probably misread the situation as to what I think's important in your endeavour to become a winning team, but that's okay. That's why I'm here.
And as for Spurs' build-up, there'd be a similar scenario on this flank, with the fullback really trying to push up on the opposite fullback as they receive the ball from this three, this time built with the goalkeeper. But the difference was Spurs used a double pivot rather than that staggered pivot with Bruno and Casemiro. And that allowed, when there were second balls, as both teams felt like they were feeling the pressure and not being able to be consistent in their possession, during second ball phases, I found specifically in those early 10 to 15 minutes, Spurs were able to create better chances just due to the distance between these two players, allowing for that quick interchange just in these right-sided midfield spaces that allowed just for that extra pass to help bypass the Man United midfield as they attempted to push up their back three. And once again, Spurs looked to play over the top, but it felt more desired and wanted rather than forced like we saw with Man United. It was an Amorim game plan that felt like it was trying to force its philosophy on the pitch but wasn't quite working, and it was a Spurs game plan that felt ambitious, attempted to play with the ball on the floor, but the pressure of the occasion did start to mount. It felt like it started and progressed into a final with a real lack of quality, and despite flashes of brilliance from the likes of Amad Diallo out on this right-hand side, who, at least for that first half, when he was able to isolate Udogie, it felt like he had the better of him, which did allow Mazraoui to really drive in these areas here. But with Bruno Fernandes, again, playing as that higher up 10, trying to back up the striker in behind and connect these wider triangles, if and when Man United did lose the ball in these areas, it felt like they had committed too many numbers high up the pitch, and the lack of counter-pressing meant that Spurs were able to escape from these areas and really drive into these big spaces either side of Casemiro. And in fact, those big spaces either side of the Brazilian is at the epicenter of the goal that won Tottenham the Europa League. Not only did it feel like the media has successfully put a small wedge between the manager and the fans, but it almost allowed them to continue in a line of questioning that was completely unreasonable all the way up until today. And the more and more they attempted to poke the bear and condescend a professional coach, the more they could build a narrative that Postecoglou was some hot-headed, arrogant manager that simply wouldn't listen to any footballing criticism that had come his way. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Ange is absolved of all criticism. I think that his football philosophy at times has been questionable and has not matched the state or predicament that Tottenham have found themselves in. He has continually attempted to kick and scream his way through a storm that quite frankly has come across as arrogant and not having a plan B. He does say mate a little bit too often. He does like looking at his shoelaces in post-match interviews, and he doesn't help himself when he's consistently recorded having, quite frankly, emotional discussions with the Tottenham fans. But one thing Postecoglou isn't is a pushover. The constant push and pull between Postecoglou and the narrative that is trying to be written for him is just the result of media-driven bias attempting to poke the bear and condescend the bear, if you can do that, at any given moment, whilst he simply stands up for himself and won't be looked down upon, won't be discredited by journalists that simply haven't achieved what he has. And the one thing it has led to is Postecoglou delivering what possibly could be one of the best quotes ever said by a manager.
Competing right at the top.
Am I going to answer the question, or are you going to keep asking? No, absolutely. And I think I'll correct myself. I don't usually win things. I always win things in my second year.
And yet, for the 9 months since that moment, that has been viewed as one of the silliest, most outrageous, almost at times laughable quotes a manager has ever said. But as soon as Postecoglou delivers exactly what he said he would do, suddenly the media shifts again. The media starts to love Ange.
You're always winning your second season, mate. How does that feel?
They make jokes with him. They make edits of him. And suddenly, Ange is the man that proved everyone wrong when the everyone was you. And then we move to the second half. Tottenham 1-0 up, a goal to defend, and it felt like a story was being written that we had seen plenty of times before. But tactically, Spurs went into a structure and a shape that completely went against everything we thought they were. They dropped into this really nice low block where the back four oftentimes would be the width of the penalty box, with the wingers helping out wide. But actually, higher up the pitch, they were a lot less aggressive and firm in their challenges, still putting pressure on Man United as they went to build, but slightly more passive in the contact. But because Man United really rely in these wide channels and exploiting the space caused by the fullbacks, when Spurs weren't as aggressive on pushing up on these fullbacks, didn't travel that many meters, there wasn't enough space for these half players like Mason Mount, Bruno Fernandes, even Mazraoui driving in. There wasn't enough space in behind this wide player, and there was enough coverage from the actual fullback. It led Man United into a really weird conundrum where it felt like creatively they just didn't have anything on the ball. But that is nothing to take away from Tottenham and Postecoglou's game plan, because this structure, the rigidity and the discipline is not how we've defined Tottenham, at least not for many, many years. To be honest, I think the truth of Ange Postecoglou and his football is so much more complex and nuanced than at first look. He came to the league sharing a message of playing football the right way, the way he truly believes it should be played. It should be entertainment for the fans. Players shouldn't look at the score or the minutes left, but should look forwards towards the goal, attempt to score another one. And managers before him and will come after him have had the same outlook of stamping their philosophy of football onto the players, sometimes at the detriment of the result, so that in the long-term future, that football can become instinct, and that instinct will win football matches. And that's not naivety, that's not fairy tale football, that's attempting to stamp a mentality and a way of life of football into this Tottenham Hotspur team. If Ange was European and spoke with a slight Spanish twang, that would be applauded and rewarded. The analysis should be on the evolution of this Postecoglou team, how his football has adapted to become slightly more rigid, even slightly more defensive, and nothing has summed up that evolution more than the stubbornness of this Tottenham team in the Europa League. For some time now, Postecoglou has been tarnished with the same brush of pushing his line as high up as possible that can easily be exploited by any runners in behind. But in this second half, Postecoglou played his back line far more intelligently, with the pressure from the centre-backs being smart, pushing into midfield when Man United attempted to overload this back line and then drop into midfield areas to bounce that ball from. Van de Ven and Romero were excellent in putting pressure on those players as they came deep and not allowing them to turn, or putting pressure on the ball so the bounce back pass was rushed and untidy. It's important to note that this structure wasn't initially a back five. It was just smart in how it used its wingers to have coverage in these wide zones that Man United tried to exploit. But as they continued to push Spurs backwards and commit their centre-backs, such as Lenny Yoro, who's incredibly comfortable on the ball, especially driving in these zones here, and Amorim always having that ace up his sleeve of committing Harry Maguire to the last line to try and win aerial duels in the box, Postecoglou made a substitution as early as the 79th minute, bringing off Brennan Johnson, one of the wingers, and replacing him with Kevin Danso, dropping him into that back line, making it a true back five, having full coverage of all of the players trying to win second balls and aerial duels in the box. To me, this substitution was what defined Tottenham's second half performance, because it wasn't the act of a man trying to win a game of football in the most entertaining, forward-thinking way. It was the chess move of a man that noticed the danger and made a change that adequately dealt with it. And ultimately, it was those shrewd decisions late into the second half that won Tottenham the Europa League, possibly in the least Spursy way ever. The media and public perception attempted to box Postecoglou into something that he just simply refused to be. And he didn't prove anyone wrong. He won under the noses of that exact narrative. And it doesn't matter, really, whether or not you decide to write Postecoglou's story in any way, because they've just won a European trophy against Man United and did it in the least Spursiest way possible. And just as soon as they get to bask in the glow of becoming European champions, suddenly this question pops up. Should Postecoglou and Tottenham carry on? And this actually has nothing to do with the media. It has to do with the fact that I can't help but feel like Postecoglou and Spurs are a match made in heaven. They're both underdogs that are written off. No one wants to accept them for what they are. No one wants to give them their credit. Everyone wants to write them off at every single turn. And yet it feels like, in the most cliche way, they're so similar that it's bad for one another. The chips on their shoulder is getting in the way of what could be the start of something really special. The tactics and the football structures and the numbers are one thing, and they deserve to be criticised and analysed correctly. But I think we have to agree that Postecoglou is a character that the Premier League desperately needs. A confident, assured manager that will say what he believes, and there's no better home for him than Tottenham. I just think it will be such a shame to throw away the potential for what that relationship could look like just because of a league campaign that's been littered with many injuries, a negative media narrative, inconsistent football. This season doesn't have to defy Postecoglou or Tottenham Hotspur. For me, Postecoglou has to stay. And if he does, the analysis of Postecoglou simply has to get better, because now he has the bragging rights against the entire country, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. So if he does piss off, that's going to be a really hard pill to swallow for many, many fans.